Hi, Trina Wright here. So, this is part two of day three of the 365 days of realizations. So, I just got home a little while ago from the shopping adventure with my two daughters, and it went really well. It's very interesting. What does really well mean? It's that idea that we paste our preferences or we create our experience. So, I spent the time overlaying how I wanted it to go. And whether I said it or not, it was really an inner thing of this feeling of like ease and peace. Of course, if all the parking spots lined up and everything I wanted was on sale, then that would have been great. It didn't exactly go that way. But what was interesting is even at one point, especially on the way home when it was dark and there was a lot of traffic and we got lost and started heading down the highway towards Sacramento, which is the big city, instead of back towards where we live, even though it seemed as if there was an outward expression coming from me that suggested that there was a frustration there. It's so interesting because I didn't really feel that. Like where I identify my resting point as, I just felt this like calmness, this peace and ease, in spite of the fact that I can acknowledge and even noted that the Trina character, I wouldn't say she was frustrated. It was just like there was some nervousness there because she was driving in a place she'd never driven and her 15-year-old was giving the directions. And so I've been noticing that more and more, like this ability to just be in this peaceful place of sort of watching what's happening and being okay with whatever reactions happen within Trina and not needing to go into it with her, like just kind of letting it pass by. And it's when that happens, the reaction is often much more subtle and much less, I would say, reactive. And so that just makes it all easier and all more in flow. So the trip altogether, the little adventure, went really well. And that was the first thing that I noted. The second thing I noted is that when I got home, there is often, when you spend a lot of time outside and there's a lot of people around, at least I notice, sort of a feeling of, I don't know if it's exactly a lowering of my vibration, but throughout the day, I made a point of kind of like closing my eyes and just kind of going back, just being more present with myself. And yet I still noticed that when I got back home, there was a different sort of feeling, like almost like a feeling like, oh, I've had a hard day and now I should go like sort of rest or veg or do that kind of thing, which I don't do because I don't usually go anywhere. And so it's interesting that feeling came, and then sorting out what to do with the feeling and just being okay with it and being present with it, and then saying, you know what, I'm going to take responsibility of my experience. I'm going to choose to take my cue from what is inside of me. That's that self-sourcing thing, not this feeling that's just arisen. I'm not going to try to sort it out. I'm not going to figure it out. And I'm certainly not going to say, oh, now I get to go do this and this and this to make up for this harder day that I had that was sort of out of my norm. So instead, I'm going to call that presence within myself, and I'm going to not sort of fall into like just going and laying on the couch and watching a movie with my kids, which I don't ever lay on the couch. So strange that feeling would even arise. And instead, I'm going to do my energization practice that I do every night. I'm going to do my meditation, and I'm going to just let myself sink back into my inner landscape, because I know that that's the best thing that's going to re-energize me and fuel me and bring me back. But it's interesting still to note how much that whole idea of like self-comfort does arise and does come up. And even though I've had enough experience to know that it hardly ever makes it better, like sometimes I don't hardly ever feel tired, but on an occasion like this, where there's been some adjustments with my vibration and a lot of like input, lots of outer stimulus, then I can feel this sort of call to just kind of, ugh. And yet when I get over that and then do the energization process and then sit and meditate, I always feel so much better afterwards. And part of my practice is to meditate right before I go to bed and right when I get up. And then as time presents itself, little tiny bits during the day. But what's interesting is it sounds sort of funny to energize and then get into that place before I go to sleep. But of course, then my sleep is coming from a place of self-sourcing, so that I'm activating that energy of source and God to fully come and help sort of replenish what I want to call my person, but really it's the person that might need the replenishing, because the place that I rest is always, in that state of filledness or fullness. So having that blended feeling of alignment between both aspects of myself, that's what makes the idea of meditation so important to me, because it's that call to move my energy back inward. So I had a day that was very filled with outer stuff, like very filled with outer pulls, going to shopping malls and purchasing things and just being engaged in that energy, finding my way home, listening to the Google Maps tell me how to get home, and navigating things with my daughter and having lots of conversation with them. Just a really different way for me to be. So it's really cool that I have that awareness, and that from that awareness, then I can make a different decision and not get caught up in some like residual momentum. And the thing I want to end with is that, which I'll talk about another day, but this morning, one of the things I had written in my journal before I had really decided I was going to go shopping was how often we have something that happens in our environment, and then we notice it, we recognize it, and then we look for something else outside of ourselves to explain the thing that happened. But we created the illusion of the first thing. So ultimately, the only answer as to why we created that comes again from within ourselves, because we created it to show ourselves something. So often my biggest example is like, if we feel unwell, like, you have an upset stomach, or you just don't feel well in your body, and then you go looking for a reason outside of yourself to explain why you don't feel well. Like, I ate something I shouldn't have, or it's stress, or, I worked out too hard, or, oh yeah, I stepped on that thing and so it's still uncomfortable. I mean, if we do that and we look, and then more story gets built and more energy gets built, and we amp that whole thing up more. So for a number of years, I've been working on, again, just bringing myself back to the inner place to say, so what is this noticing that I have about the environment telling me? How can I work with the circumstances, which I ultimately created? What is it telling me? And then stop it there, so that I'm not then continuing to create more and more and more based more and more and more on the circumstances. Because if I do that, it starts to gain momentum and have a life of its own. So in the food example, or the body example, if I then say the thing in my body is related to something I ate, then all of a sudden the next time I eat it, the same thing's going to happen, and it's probably going to get worse and worse, to the point that then maybe there'll be a certain food I can't eat. And since I, from a deep place of recognition, understand that we don't really even need to eat food, because all food is just condensed prana, which is the energy that fuels us all. It's like source energy. Not only can fulfill us from the inside out in terms of all those needs that we have, it can also fulfill us in terms of our need for sustenance. And of course, it's only as much as your belief will allow. And so my belief doesn't allow that fully, but I'm leaning in that direction. I think we can eat way, way less. And the more inward focus that we spend, and the more time we spend in that self-sourcing, that's going to be evidenced with our relationship with food and everything else. So those are things that I'll be able to get into more, but overall it was a success. Overall, I feel good about taking the moments that I did at various different times before I left the house, and then mostly on my own. I think the one thing I would do different next time is invite the girls to come more into that energy with me, like before we go into the big mall or before we go into a store, just to like, and if I notice, like a couple times I did notice that there was some energy of just like, there's this sort of agitated energy that can come up when people are shopping, and just to really call to presence. And I think I did do that, and I was able with them to sort of, because they had their own money and they had a certain amount that they could spend. So really calling back some consciousness to say like, okay, is that what you want to buy? And if you buy that, you were going to buy this. So then, how do you feel about that? Because I think it's often easy to just spend and not really pay attention to it, especially if we fall into that trap of thinking that something outside of ourselves is going to make us happy or lead to our happiness. So all in all, it was a success, and I took some little notes within myself so that next time I'll do even better. And this is the journey. This is what we're all doing to come back into remembering, to stop living so much in the forgetting, and not letting momentum, either our own or the collective momentum about things like distraction and consumption, just take us to be much more conscious and awake in every moment of our life, no matter what we're doing, so that we can always make decisions about like what leans me more in the direction of source or God or my inner being. How would this be viewed through the eyes of source or God? And because really that's the best I can do in any moment. And that is my free will to make those decisions and those choices. So I appreciate your time, and I invite you to do that, to be a little more conscious in whatever way works for you. It's not easy because there is so much momentum to the other side of it, to just sort of letting the circumstances pull us and take us, letting our past experiences and whatever we have inside of ourselves about lack and limitation, and even just times that, we're triggered by something, we often let those things take us. So any little bit that we do to be more conscious is a move in the right direction. And the more that we're like present with it with ourselves, write about it in a journal, talk about it with your partner, a friend, those things help, because it's like we've developed these patterns over a long period of time. So they're not just going to go away. It's like anything that we want to shift and be successful about, it really takes that commitment and that presence. So I invite you to dive into that in whatever way feels right to you, and have a great day. And I will see you tomorrow.